The mansion on the edge of Lakehurst stood like a monument to control. Steel, glass, and silence. Nothing in its design was accidental, not the seamless marble floors or the climate-controlled air that hummed quietly through hidden vents. Yet, for all its perfection, it felt hollow, like a museum no one dared to disturb. Inside, Ethan Ward sat at the head of his 14-foot dining table, eyes fixed on a tablet glowing with graphs and emails he didn't care to read. The screen reflected on his face, pale against the dim morning light slipping through the tall windows. Beyond the glass walls stretched the gray shimmer of the lake, still and endless, mirroring the emptiness of his own home. He was 40 now, a man whose inventions had changed the digital world but who could not fix the single thing that mattered most. 3 years earlier, on the day his wife Amelia died giving birth to their twin daughters, laughter had vanished from his life like a power cut no one repaired. The twins, Ella and Eden, had entered the world small and silent, their fragile bodies betraying a mystery the doctors could never fully explain. Their limbs were stiff, their eyes half-focused, their lips motionless. Specialists from Zurich to Tokyo examined them, theorized, prescribed. Each left with polite apologies and invoices that couldn't buy sound. Ethan turned grief into work, pouring himself into code, automation, control systems, things that obeyed. His house mirrored his mind, minimalist, precise, colorless. Nurses moved like shadows along the hallways, tending to the girls, adjusting feeding tubes, logging oxygen levels. Machines filled the air with soft, mechanical rhythm. They were the only voices left in a house that had forgotten how to breathe. That morning began like every other. His assistant had just called to confirm a virtual board meeting at 10. A fleet of electric cars waited in the driveway. The staff glided through their routines, sterile, efficient, invisible. Ethan's watch buzzed with reminders. Quarterly report, investor call, therapy check-in. He followed the schedule with the same detached precision he once applied to code reviews. Then something unusual slipped into that perfect rhythm. A sound too organic, too alive to belong there. At first it was faint, a vibration just beyond recognition. He frowned, thinking it was feedback from the intercom system. But it came again, soft and deliberate, a hum, low and warm, rising through the corridor like a whisper of life. He froze. It was coming from the therapy wing. His first instinct was irritation. The medical wing was supposed to remain silent during working hours. Yet as he neared the door, his steps slowed. Beneath the hum was another sound, thinner, uncertain, almost like breath catching at the edge of speech. Ethan's hand hovered over the door handle. The faint syllable that followed made him drop his briefcase. Ma. The sound was fragile, trembling, but it wasn't mechanical. It wasn't a glitch or a trick of imagination. It came from human lips, from one of the twins. He pushed the door open carefully. Inside, sunlight spilled through tall windows onto the padded floor. His daughters sat where they always did, supported by medical cushions and adaptive braces. But they weren't staring blankly ahead as usual. Their eyes, those still, distant eyes, were fixed on the woman kneeling before them. Maria Alvarez, the new maid, knelt in her gray uniform, a cleaning rag forgotten beside her bucket. Her dark hair was pulled back, a few strands loose around her face. She wasn't aware of him standing there. Her voice filled the room, soft but steady, humming a tune that didn't belong to any lullaby Ethan knew. As she hummed, she reached out gently, brushing a strand of hair from Ella's forehead. The child blinked. Once. Twice. Her lips trembled. Then again that impossible whisper. Ma! Ethan's pulse pounded. He gripped the doorframe, unsure if he was witnessing reality or grief playing tricks on him. 3 years of silence, and now this? Maria smiled as though the moment were nothing extraordinary. That's it, Corazon, she said softly, her Spanish accent wrapping the words in warmth. You can try again. I'm listening. Eden's fingers twitched on the mat. Maria turned her attention to her, humming once more, slower this time. The melody was almost hypnotic, simple, repetitive, intimate. It didn't belong in a mansion full of machines. It belonged in a home that had forgotten tenderness. And then the air shifted. Ella made another sound, not quite the same syllable, but close enough to shatter everything Ethan thought he knew about his daughters. He stood motionless, watching the impossible unfold. The girls, who had never responded to speech, music, or motion, were now visibly reacting to a woman who'd been in their home for less than 2 weeks. Maria wasn't touching them. She wasn't coaxing or commanding. She was simply present, eyes soft, hands open, humming like she believed they could hear her. Ethan's throat tightened. His mind reached for logic, for the easy explanations. Coincidence, muscle spasm, involuntary reflex. But deep inside, something older than reason stirred, a fragile hope he had buried long ago. Maria's tone shifted to a lower note, rhythmic and deliberate. "You are safe," she whispered, though the girls likely couldn't understand her words. "You are loved." Eden's hand flexed. A faint, broken breath escaped her lips. Half sigh, half sound. The nurse standing nearby covered her mouth, eyes wide. Ethan wanted to speak, to demand an explanation, but no words came. The air itself felt sacred, and he feared breaking it. He took one step back. Then another. Maria still hadn't seen him. Her humming continued, steady, unwavering, while sunlight pooled around the three of them like a quiet blessing. The girl's eyes fluttered in rhythm with her voice, their bodies no longer stiff but calm, their small fingers tracing invisible shapes in the air. Ethan's mind swirled with disbelief. The finest doctors in the country had failed to spark even the smallest reaction. Yet here, in the quiet of an ordinary morning, a maid with cleaning gloves and no medical training had done what science could not. The hallway behind him seemed colder now. He reached for the wall to steady himself. This house, which had once thrived on precision and automation, had come alive again, not through technology or therapy, but through something simpler and infinitely harder to grasp. He turned toward the corridor, walking away before anyone could notice him. The door closed softly behind him, but the sound remained, echoing in his chest. That fragile syllable, "ma," replayed in his mind like a haunting melody. For 3 years, silence had ruled this place. Now it was broken, and Ethan Ward didn't know whether to feel joy or fear. All he knew was that something inside the mansion had awakened. And it wasn't just his daughters. Morning arrived clear and brittle, the lake a sheet of hammered silver under a thin sun. Ethan skipped breakfast and went straight to his office, a room designed to intimidate. Dark walnut walls, a monolithic desk, a single abstract painting that looked like a storm contained in a frame. He pressed a button on the console. A few minutes later, Maria stepped in, wiping invisible dust from her palms before folding them at her waist. She stood without fidgeting. No apology in her posture. No defiance either. Just steadiness. "Close the door," he said. She did, the latch catching with a soft click. "What exactly were you doing in that room yesterday?" His voice came out flatter than he intended. "Cleaning," she replied. "And singing. They like it." Ethan leaned back, fingers steepled. "You were hired to maintain order here, not to experiment." Her gaze didn't drift. "I wasn't experimenting, sir. I was being present." "You presume quite a lot." "I presume they can feel," she said. "That's all." The room absorbed the silence that followed. Outside the windows, gulls swept low over the water and disappeared behind the boathouse. "Do you have training?" he asked. "Therapy credentials? Neuroscience? Anything?" "No formal licenses," she said evenly. "Only experience." "With whom?" "My brother." The answer landed between them like a pebble dropped into a still pool. Ethan waited, but she didn't elaborate. A modest refusal to plead her case. "You understand the liability this poses," he said. "If your approach upsets their autonomic functions, I'm responsible. We've spent years building a protocol here. You don't get to improvise because you have a song stuck in your head." A slim breath entered her chest, slow and measured. "I won't touch the machines," she said. "I won't change their medications. I won't interfere with the nurses. I will only do what I've done, sit with them and let them hear a human voice that isn't asking them for proof." Ethan bristled. "This house runs on proof." She dipped her chin a fraction. "Sometimes sound is how the soul remembers it's alive." He almost laughed, an old reflex sharpened by fatigue and pride. "You think poetry is medicine?" "I think attention is," she said. "And patience. Music helps." He dismissed her with a gesture. "You may go." She turned without hurry, closed the door gently, and left the storm where it was, on his side of the wood. The day wore on like a long hallway. Meetings, projections, a partner in Singapore urging aggressive expansion into elder care robotics. The irony wasn't lost on him. He signed the term sheet and stared through his reflection in the glass until the sky went the color of pewter. He should have gone to bed. Instead, he opened the archive feed from the nursery cameras. Night vision rendered the room in gradients of green. The twins lay in their support cradles, the soft rise and fall of their chests a small miracle he tried not to take for granted. He scrubbed backward to the morning and hit play. There she was, Maria, with a bucket, a rag, and that unhurried presence. She sat cross-legged, not nearer to one child than the other, careful to keep her body in their shared line of sight. No theatrics. No declarations. She began with breath, shaping it into a tone. The mic barely caught it, yet the room seemed to hold it up like a thread of light. Ethan leaned closer. Ella's eyes shifted toward the sound. Eden's fingers curled, released. Maria told a small story in Spanish about a girl who listened to the rain and learned its rhythm. Then she retold it in English, not word for word, but as if translating the mood rather than the syllables. The twins tracked her mouth. A blink. A tremor in one corner of the lip. She stopped talking and hummed one low note for a long time, vibrating like the string of a cello. That was when the feed captured it, barely audible, a small fracture in silence. "Ma." Ethan paused the video. He rewound 2 seconds. Played it again. The sound endured. Not a mechanical cough. Not air escaping a valve. A phoneme dragged up from deep water. He closed the laptop and stood in the dark, palms flat on the cool desk. A strange warmth moved under his sternum, almost painful in its relief. He hated it. He needed certainty. This, whatever it was, made a battlefield of his head. He tried to reason it away, the syllable a coincidence, the hum provoking a reflex, the eye tracking a trick of the camera angle. His mind worked hard at its old job. Containment. The rest of him was less obedient. Sleep, when it finally came, arrived in shards, brief and unsatisfying. He woke before dawn to the lake throwing light at the window and a restless urge he didn't bother naming. He did not announce himself the next morning. He walked the service corridor with the soft tread of a man inspecting a machine he built. Nurses passed him with nods. A therapy calendar hung on a corkboard, crowded with appointment cards. He kept going until he reached the open doorway of the nursery. Maria sat on the floor beside the twins, back straight, hands relaxed on her knees. She had no devices in front of her. No sheet music. No timer. Only a small, folded handkerchief and a paperback with the spine softened by use. Her voice filled the space with an unadorned melody. No words at first, just tone. "Buenos dias," she said after a while, bright without cheerleading. "Hoy hey sol, pero está frío." Then, lightly, "Good morning. It's sunny, but the air is cold. We can have both." She narrated the room like a tour guide of the ordinary. The way the curtain breathed in a draft, the faint scent of eucalyptus lotion, the distant creak of a delivery truck out by the gate. Nothing magical. Nothing sentimental. Yet the girls responded as if these small facts tethered them to the present. "Uno," she whispered, touching her own thumb. "Two." A second finger. "Dos." She matched the cues with tiny pauses, leaving room for their nervous systems to decide. Ella blinked once, then twice. Eden's forefinger tapped the mat in a hesitant rhythm. Maria didn't praise them. She didn't flinch toward excitement. She simply mirrored the tempo, tapping her own knee gently, as if to say, "I'm with you. I see the pace you can manage. I will not rush you." Ethan stayed in the shadow of the doorframe, willing himself to be a camera, only recording, not interpreting. He watched the mechanism of her patience. When she sensed tension in one child's jaw, she lowered the register of her humming. When attention drifted, she rotated the story, Spanish to English, English to Spanish, like turning a prism to catch a new angle of light. She told them about baked bread cooling on a foil-lined counter at dawn in El Paso. She described the sound yeast makes when it wakes. She said her brother used to claim he could hear it, the tiny fizz like sand whispering. She didn't say his name. She didn't explain. The room did not need history. It needed presence. Ethan felt the old armor scuff and loosen. He'd paid for expertise that came in bullet points and confidence. What Maria offered was unmarketed and unhurried, attention as craft. And his daughters, were answering. Ella's mouth trembled again. Not a word this time, but the preface to one, the body rehearsing a shape it had never learned. Eden's hand drifted toward Maria's hem and stopped, hovering, as if the air itself had become tangible. The nurse on duty glanced toward the doorway and saw Ethan. She didn't call out, didn't break the spell. Her eyes asked a question. Do you see this? He did. He couldn't not. Minutes, maybe 20, maybe 40, passed in that small theater of breath and tone. When a cleaner rolled a cart out in the hall, Maria paused and smiled at the sudden clatter. "Escuchen," she murmured. "Listen." She made the sound with her mouth. Brrr, softer, almost comic. Ella's lips twitched toward an imitation. Maria nodded once, approval without fuss, and went back to the hum, the code of sound steady as a hand on a shoulder. Ethan's head filled with crosscurrents. Liability. Boundaries. Insurance. Then, against that internal bureaucracy, a simpler current ran, clear as water. Stay. Watch. Learn. He edged back before anyone addressed him, kept to the wall, and let the corridor swallow him up. The house looked different on the return walk. Less like a system and more like a place where lives were happening in real time. The art on the landing stopped resembling investment. The scent of coffee coming from the kitchen felt like evidence of mornings rather than maintenance. In his office, he didn't sit. The chair seemed unworthy of the electricity moving through him. He stood at the window until a bank of cloud sheared away and a bright triangle opened over the lake. His phone vibrated with a calendar alert for a product review. He dismissed it. He thought of Maria's phrase, the one he'd wanted to sneer at. Sound as memory of being alive. He replayed the room in his mind, the melody, the measured pauses, the way she matched her tempo to theirs. It wasn't mysticism. It wasn't rebellion. It was fluency in a language he'd never tried to learn. He exhaled, long and rough. Pride tasted metallic on his tongue. How is she doing this? He whispered, the question more vow than doubt, and knew he would pay whatever it cost to find the answer. The storm of questions followed Ethan through the day, but the answers refused to come. By evening, the sky had turned to ash, and wind swept across the lake with a hollow whistle that seemed to echo through his ribs. He stared at the dining table set for one and made a decision he hadn't made in years. He told the chef to set 2 plates. When Maria entered, she paused at the threshold, uncertain whether she'd misheard the invitation. She wore a plain blouse beneath her uniform, her dark hair still damp from washing up. Ethan gestured to the opposite chair. Sit. Her hesitation lasted only a second. Then she obeyed, folding her hands neatly on the linen. No one spoke for a long while. Cutlery glimmered between them, untouched. You've been with us 3 weeks, Ethan began. In that time, you've achieved what medical experts couldn't. I haven't achieved anything, she said softly. They're the ones remembering how to feel. He studied her face, not beautiful in the conventional sense, but luminous with calm. You think this is emotional memory? I think bodies remember kindness, she said, even when the mind is trapped. He wanted to scoff, but her voice disarmed him. So what? Kindness cured them. Not cured, she corrected. Reached. Ethan pushed his plate away. You're saying affection bypasses neurology. That humming fixes brain damage. No, sir. Her tone never hardened. It doesn't fix. It connects. The words unsettled him. They felt too simple, too clean. Explain, he said, leaning forward. She took a slow breath. My brother, Luis, was born with the same diagnosis as your daughter's. Doctors said he'd never know his name. But I watched him follow sound. He could sense tone, fear, comfort, laughter. When I sang, he'd twitch his fingers like he was answering. He never spoke, but he listened. That was enough for him to stay. Her eyes flickered downward. He died before his 9th birthday. Ethan said nothing. The room dimmed as the clouds outside swallowed the moonlight. The story hung between them, spare and unembellished. I promised myself, she continued, that if I ever found another child trapped the way he was, I'd speak the language he taught me, patience and presence. Sometimes the body just needs to be reminded it's still loved. Her statement wasn't sentimental. It was declarative, as if it were a law of physics. Ethan's throat tightened. He stood, walked to the window, and let the glass cool his palms. Love doesn't rewire neurons, he muttered. No, she replied. But it lights the room where the neurons live. He turned to face her. You believe that? I've seen it, she said. The sound of wind filled the silence. He wanted to dismantle her logic the way he would debug a system, line by line. But every rebuttal collapsed under the weight of the image that had haunted him all day. His daughter's eyes tracking Maria's voice like plants turning toward light. Eat, he said abruptly, more to end the conversation than to continue it. They finished in silence. When she rose to leave, he stopped her. Maria! She turned. Don't let anyone see you in that room tomorrow morning. Not yet. Her brow furrowed, but she nodded. Understood. When the door closed, the mansion fell into its familiar stillness. Yet the silence felt different now. Less like absence, more like suspense. Later that night, Ethan stood in the twins' room. Machines blinked softly around them, throwing specks of green light across their pale faces. The rhythm of their breathing matched the steady pulse of the monitors. He felt like an intruder in his own home. He sat on the edge of Ella's bed, the memory of Maria's voice looping in his mind. That tune, untrained, imperfect, had pulled life out of stillness. Could imitation summon it again? He hesitated, then cleared his throat. The first sound that came out of him was jagged, awkward. He hadn't sung since his wife's funeral, when the choir drowned his own voice in mercy. Still, he tried again, shaping the hum into something that resembled Maria's melody. Low, fragile, uncertain. The air thickened. Machines kept their indifferent rhythm. He leaned closer to his daughters. It's just me, he whispered, the sound strange in the sterile room. You're safe. Nothing. No flicker, no tremor. He almost stopped. The whole attempt felt foolish, desperate. An engineer trying to solve grief with a lullaby. But as he drew in another breath to leave, a movement caught his eye. Eden's lashes fluttered once. Then twice. Her fingers twitched against the blanket. Not random, but rhythmic, faintly in time with his humming. His breath hitched. He leaned closer, afraid to blink. Ella's hand twitched too, the smallest ripple through her knuckles. It lasted only a few seconds, but it was real. He froze, unsure whether to call the nurse or simply stay. Instead, he whispered the only word that felt true. Hi! The twins didn't respond again, but the pulse of the moment lingered like warmth after light. He sat there until his neck ached, until the machines faded into background hum. For the first time, the room didn't feel like a ward, it felt like a cradle. When he finally stood, his hands trembled. He looked once more at his daughters, eyes closed, faces still, and understood that something invisible had shifted. Not a cure, not a miracle, just a bridge, built from the most unlikely material, sound. He walked out quietly, closed the door, and paused in the corridor, the echo of Maria's words following him into the dark. It connects. That single truth clung to him like breath in cold air. For the first time in 3 years, Ethan Ward didn't feel like a man standing beside loss. He felt like someone reaching across it. The days that followed settled into a fragile calm. Ethan moved through the mansion as if afraid to disturb whatever quiet magic had begun to awaken within its walls. The nurses noticed the difference in him, the softened tone, the pauses before speaking, the way his gaze lingered on the twins as if rediscovering them each hour. Even the staff spoke a little lower now, as though reverence had replaced routine. It was late afternoon when the house filled with a sound that stopped him mid-step. He was walking past the corridor that led to the nursery, reviewing documents on his tablet, when the melody reached him, a slow, tender hum, curling through the hall like a ghost tracing the walls. He froze. The song was painfully familiar. A simple tune, almost childlike, yet threaded with melancholy. His heart kicked against his ribs. No one else could know that melody. It was Amelia's. He followed the sound before he could think, the tablet forgotten in his hand. The door to the nursery was slightly open. Inside, Maria sat cross-legged between the twins' cribs, her voice low and unhurried. The twins watched her intently, faces calm, their eyes bright. "Where did you learn that song?" His voice cracked through the room, sharp and startled. Maria startled but didn't rise. "Sir, That melody," he interrupted. "Answer me. Where did you hear it?" Her brows knit. "I didn't mean to upset you," she said softly. "I found it while cleaning. It was written in a small notebook behind one of the nursery shelves. I assumed it was your wife's. The handwriting." He stepped closer. "You found her writing?" Maria nodded and reached for the small leather book resting beside her on the floor. She held it out with both hands, the gesture careful, almost ceremonial. It was covered in dust. "I wiped it off and read only enough to know it was meant for them. I thought the song might comfort them." Ethan took the notebook slowly, fingers trembling. The leather was worn smooth at the corners. The moment he opened it, the scent of old paper and lavender met him. Amelia's favorite flower. Her handwriting tilted across the page, the same slanted blue ink she'd used for every grocery list, every note she left him on the fridge in another lifetime. He turned the first page. Instructions for feeding schedules. Notes about lullabies. Scribbles about baby names she hadn't yet chosen between. Then, near the center, a title underlined twice. "For When I'm Not There." His chest tightened. Beneath it, in neat lines, were the lyrics to the melody Maria had been singing. Words he'd never heard before, but somehow already knew. Simple phrases about stars, hands, and the promise of being seen even in silence. The notebook slipped slightly in his grip. He steadied it against his chest as though holding something alive. Maria remained quiet. "I didn't mean to intrude," she whispered. "I thought it might help the girls feel close to her." Ethan didn't respond. He could barely breathe. He sat down slowly on the edge of a small chair near the window, the book heavy in his hands. Every line he read felt like a pulse from a heart he thought had stopped long ago. Page after page, Amelia spoke to him through ink, reminders, hopes, fragments of a future she never lived to see. If the nights get long, tell them their mother loved the dark because it made the stars look closer. He reached the final page and saw a line that seemed to bleed off the paper itself. "If our girls ever live in silence, remind them love still reaches them, even without words." Something inside him gave way. He pressed his hand to his mouth, a sound escaping that was neither sigh nor sob, something rawer, older, grief that had waited years to be heard. His shoulders shook as he bent forward, elbows on his knees, tears slipping silently between his fingers. He had mourned Amelia's death but never allowed himself to miss her. Now, sitting in that room, her handwriting staining his palms, he realized he had spent years refusing the one thing she'd left behind: softness. Maria stepped back, giving him space. She did not speak, did not reach out. Her presence was steady but unobtrusive, a living echo of the tenderness Amelia had embodied. The twins watched quietly from their cribs, as if they too recognized the shift. After a long while, Ethan spoke, voice breaking against the edges of exhaustion. "You found this behind the dresser?" "Yes," Maria said, tucked between two wooden panels. Maybe she meant to hide it for when they were older. He nodded slowly, eyes still fixed on the ink. "You were singing this to them?" "Yes," she said simply. "It felt right." He closed the notebook, careful not to smudge the ink, and stood. For once, he didn't mask his emotion. "It was right," he said quietly. "You gave them back a part of her I thought I'd buried." Maria lowered her gaze. "I only followed what was already in the room." He looked around, the sunlight streaming in through sheer curtains, the faint scent of baby lotion, the two fragile bodies breathing in rhythm. "You're wrong," he said. "You gave this house back its pulse." Her expression softened, though she said nothing more. She gathered her cleaning cloth and stood, stepping quietly aside. He left the nursery without another word, the notebook pressed to his chest. That night, Ethan didn't go to his study. He sat in bed under a single lamp, the notebook open across his lap. He read every line twice, tracing Amelia's handwriting with a fingertip as though he could feel her through it. The more he read, the clearer her voice became, the small, playful tone she used when she was pregnant, her laughter bubbling at the end of every sentence. Don't let them grow up in a house that measures love in money. He realized then that he'd broken every wish she'd written. The hours slipped by unnoticed. Outside, the wind eased and the moon broke through the clouds, casting a pale shimmer over the lake. Ethan turned the final page once more. The line about love reaching beyond words stared back at him, simple, unflinching. He closed the book and held it against his heart, eyes burning. The silence around him no longer felt cruel, it felt full. Somewhere down the hall, he could faintly hear Maria's voice again, humming the same lullaby. The sound drifted through the vents like breath moving through the mansion's lungs. He whispered into the stillness, the words trembling out of him before he could stop them. Maybe love never left this house after all. The wind outside carried the echo away, and for the first time in years, Ethan let it go willingly. The rain arrived without warning. One moment, the lake outside shimmered with quiet restraint. The next, a wall of water smothered it, the sky breaking open in electric veins of light. The wind pressed hard against the glass walls of the Ward mansion, rattling the framework like an unsettled spirit. Upstairs, in the nursery, the twins stirred. Their calm vanished the moment thunder cracked above the roof. Ella's eyes darted to the window. Eden's fingers trembled on her blanket. The nurses tried adjusting machines, softening lights, whispering reassurances that dissolved into the storm's growl. Then, over the chaos, Maria's footsteps sounded on the stairs. She appeared at the doorway, hair damp from rain, her uniform clinging to her sleeves. "Let me," she said quietly, and the nurses stepped aside. She crossed the room with deliberate calm, her voice already shaping a melody. The lullaby, the same one Amelia had written, rose through the noise like a thread of light piercing through dark water. Every note seemed to soften the room, pushing back the violence outside. "Sure," she whispered, her accent smoothing the edges of each word. "The clouds are only playing. BBs. They're loud, but they'll go." The twins' breathing slowed. The machines steadied. Lightning flooded the room for an instant, throwing their faces into sharp relief. Two small figures caught between fear and fascination. Ethan arrived at the doorway seconds later, rain still glistening on his coat. He hadn't planned to come upstairs. Something in the storm had drawn him instinctively. When he saw them, Maria on the floor, the twins clutching the edges of their blankets, the hum of the lullaby weaving through the sound of thunder, he froze. Without a word, he stepped in and sat beside her. The room was dim, lit only by a single lamp. Rain ran down the glass like tears, each droplet catching flashes of light. For a long stretch of minutes, no one spoke. Maria continued to hum, her voice steady even as the storm roared. Then, through the rhythm of her tune, a different sound broke the air. Soft, uncertain, but unmistakable. "Ma." The syllable hung between them like a spark that refused to die. Ethan's breath caught. He turned sharply toward the crib. "Say that again," he whispered. Before Maria could respond, another voice, fainter, more fragile, followed. "Dad." Everything stopped. Even the thunder seemed to hesitate before its next strike. Ethan's vision blurred. His body went rigid, his mind blank. "Did you hear that?" Maria's hands covered her mouth, tears rising fast. She nodded, voice trembling. "They're trying to say Daddy." He moved closer, the floor cold under his knees. "I'm here," he said softly. His voice broke on the second word. "Daddy's here." Ella's fingers twitched toward the sound. Eden made a faint motion with her lips, a small, breathy exhale that almost became another syllable. Ethan leaned in, his trembling hand brushing over Ella's blanket. "You can do it," he whispered. "You can." The sound came again, clearer this time, fragile but alive. He pressed his forehead to the edge of the crib, the tears coming unbidden. "Yes," he murmured. "I hear you. I hear you." Maria's quiet sob blended with the storm outside. "It wasn't me, sir," she said through the tears. "It was love remembering how to speak." Lightning illuminated the room again, the reflection of a man kneeling beside two small souls who had finally found their voices. The power flickered, and for a second, everything vanished into darkness. Then the generator hummed back to life, the light softer now, almost holy. The twins shifted, small smiles forming, uncoordinated but pure. They had never smiled like that before. Ethan looked at Maria. Words failed him. Gratitude felt too small, awe too weak. He could only nod, his chest rising with a deep, shuddering breath. Maria wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "They were never broken," she said quietly. "They were waiting to be heard." The storm outside began to tire, its rage dissolving into rain. The thunder rolled further away, replaced by the low, rhythmic sound of water against the glass. The air in the nursery felt lighter, almost sweet. Ethan stayed beside the cribs long after the others left. Maria sat a few feet away, her back against the wall, exhaustion written across her face. Between them, silence reigned, but it wasn't empty anymore. He watched the twins drift toward sleep, their chests rising in sync. Occasionally, one of them would twitch or make a soft cooing sound. Each sound struck him like a revelation, proof that something ancient and human had survived inside them all along. As the storm ebbed, Ethan reached over and turned off the lamp. Moonlight filtered through the clouds, spreading a faint silver glow over everything. The cribs, the floor, the chair where Maria dozed with her head against the wall. He whispered into the stillness, "You did it, my loves. You spoke." But even as he said it, he knew the truth. They hadn't done it alone. Down the hall, he could still faintly hear the melody Maria had sung, the tune his wife had written years ago. It wound through the air like a thread connecting every heart in the house, past and present. For the first time in 3 years, Ethan didn't feel haunted. The ghosts that had lingered in the corners, grief, guilt, silence, seemed to have dissolved into something else entirely. Peace. He leaned back, listening. The rain was easing into a soft patter, a lullaby of its own. Somewhere in that rhythm, he heard the faintest sound, a laugh, small and clumsy, but unmistakable. He looked up sharply. One of the twins had giggled in her sleep. The sound rippled through the room, delicate yet powerful enough to make him forget how to breathe. He smiled, not the practiced smile he wore for boardrooms or cameras, but one pulled from somewhere untouched by success or sorrow. Outside, dawn was beginning to push through the clouds. He stood slowly, stretched the stiffness from his knees, and looked once more at his daughters. "You've changed everything," he whispered. Maria stirred, blinking sleepily. "They'll remember this," she murmured. "So will I," he said. The last echo of thunder faded into silence, leaving behind the faintest trace of laughter. The house, once a monument to grief, now pulsed with quiet life. In that fragile hour before sunrise, Ethan Ward understood what the doctors never could. The human heart, when heard, can teach the impossible to speak. It had been a week since the storm. In that short time, everything changed. The twins had begun making small, deliberate sounds, syllables that grew stronger each day. Nurses no longer whispered. They smiled openly. Even the machines that once dominated the nursery seemed quieter, as though listening to the new rhythm of the house. Maria, now the axis of that change, remained steady. Her mornings spent reading softly to the girls, her afternoons guiding them through movement therapy disguised as play. She spoke to them in both English and Spanish, weaving stories about clouds and rivers, about courage and belonging. The twins listened. They responded, sometimes with laughter, sometimes with effortful sounds that resembled words. Then, one morning, an envelope arrived, thick, white, embossed with the seal of a California institute. Ethan found it resting on the foyer table. The letter was addressed to Ms. Maria Alvarez. He handed it to her at breakfast. She read in silence, her expression still. When she finished, she folded the paper carefully, avoiding his eyes. "It's from the Pacific Children's Therapy Center," she said at last. "They want me to lead a pilot program. Someone from your medical team must have sent my report." Ethan nodded slowly. "That's an incredible opportunity." She smiled faintly. "It is." But her tone lacked joy. "You're not excited," he observed. "I am," she said, but her fingers tightened around the envelope. "I just don't know if I can leave them yet." He looked toward the twins by the window. They sat on the floor surrounded by soft toys, sunlight painting their faces gold. Ella traced a toy block with her finger while Eden watched the light shift through the curtains. A small sound escaped one of them, a half-giggle, half-gurgle, followed by another. Ethan's voice softened. "They're not the only ones who need you, Maria. We all do." She looked at him then, really looked, and something unspoken passed between them. Gratitude, affection, understanding. He gestured toward the twins. "Stay. Not as staff. As family." Her eyes shimmered. "You don't have to do that, sir." "I know," he said. "But I want to." She hesitated, glancing toward the girls again. "I can't promise miracles," she murmured. He smiled. "You already gave us one." The conversation ended quietly. But the decision was made. Maria stayed. Months moved gently through the mansion. The cold glass corridors softened with color. Ethan replaced the sterile lights with warm lamps. He ordered a piano restored for the living room, the same one Amelia had once played. The sound of its keys soon mingled with laughter and the tinkling of wind chimes Maria hung outside the nursery. Each morning began with music now. Maria would hum while preparing breakfast, the twins responding with bright, imperfect echoes. Their coordination improved. Their faces grew expressive, their gazes sharp and curious. Ethan no longer worked in isolation. He brought his laptop to the nursery, listening while they learned new sounds. He discovered that patience could feel like progress, that silence was no longer something to conquer but something to share. Evenings were his favorite. The lake reflected the sunset like a second sky, and the house glowed in amber tones. Sometimes he would hear Maria in the garden, singing softly while the twins clapped along with mismatched rhythm. One afternoon, he stood at the top of the stairs, pausing as a sound floated up from below, the melody, the lullaby. But this time, it wasn't just Maria's voice. Two smaller tones followed hers, fragile but deliberate, trying to match each word. He descended the steps slowly. In the living room, the piano stood open, sunlight striking its polished surface. Maria sat on the bench, her hands moving lightly across the keys. The twins, propped beside her, hummed through the familiar melody, broken, breathy, but radiant. Ethan froze, his chest tightening. Every note felt like a heartbeat he'd forgotten how to count. When the song ended, Maria turned and found him standing there. "They remembered," she said softly. He swallowed hard. They remembered her. "They remembered love," she corrected gently. He crossed the room and sat beside them, his eyes never leaving the twins. They reached for his hands, their tiny fingers curling around his. For a long time, no one spoke. The house, once defined by silence, now hummed with the layered sound of life. Laughter, music, the echo of forgiveness that had no need for words. As summer approached, Ethan began to spend his evenings outside. He'd sit on the garden bench beneath the oak trees while the twins played on the grass under Maria's watch. Their movements were clumsy but full of wonder, fingers grasping at petals, faces turning toward wind and light. He often brought the leather notebook with him. Its pages had yellowed slightly from use, but Amelia's handwriting remained as vivid as ever. Some nights, he'd read her words aloud to the children, not to remind them of loss, but to remind himself that love had survived it. One evening, as the sky blushed with orange and violet, Maria joined him. The twins were near the pond, chasing ripples with sticks. Their laughter spilled into the warm air. "They've started linking words," she said, settling beside him. "Colors, animals, simple things. Their minds are opening like windows." Ethan smiled. "And you opened them." She shook her head. "We all did. I only kept singing." He looked toward the children, then at her. "I used to think technology could heal everything," he said quietly. "That progress was the same as purpose. But this," he gestured toward the garden, "this is what healing looks like. Simple, slow, real." The light faded to gold, then to rose. The laughter of the twins carried across the water. Ethan leaned back, letting the moment fill him. His voice dropped to a murmur, almost to himself. "All my life, I believed the future could be coded. But the only thing that ever saved a life was written in the heart." Maria said nothing. She didn't need to. The truth sat between them like sunlight that refused to fade. As the sun sank, the house glowed from within. Music drifted faintly through open windows, the lullaby, now sung by 3 voices instead of 1. The mansion that had once held its breath now exhaled peace. The walls no longer listened for sorrow. They echoed laughter. And as twilight deepened, Ethan Ward finally felt what he had spent years chasing in silence. Not control, not success, but the quiet, sustaining pulse of a home reborn. Sometimes healing doesn't come from medicine or miracles. It comes from love finding its way back into the silence. If this story moved you, subscribe. And let's keep sharing stories that remind the world how love still speaks, even when words are gone.